Every voice matters. Blue Lift is a podcast dedicated to address the issues that affect all of us, with engaging discussions with progressive thought leaders and experts as guests. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Blue Lift. We're so glad to have you here today. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time with us. As usual, we've got a great guest. We have with us today Luis Mata. Luis is the Government Relations Manager at the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, TIRRC. And he monitors the legislative process at the local, state, and federal level for opportunities to defend and advance immigrant and refugee rights. That's always, I'm sure, been an interesting job, and here lately, it's got to be a really interesting job. Luis is originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, and he was formerly undocumented. He has several years of legislative, electoral, and community advocacy experience, and he's dedicated his career to advancing a vision of a Tennessee where all of us can belong and thrive. And the episode right before this one is with a local pastor. And we also talked about how Tennessee can be a place where all of us can belong and thrive. So it's kind of a thread that we have going here. Welcome to Blue Lift, Luis.
Thank you so much. I am truly honored to be here with you. And I have followed the awesome work that y'all do. And I'm just, lucky to be here with you all.
Well, thank you so much. So I just want to dive right in. And one of the questions that when I told people you were going to be a guest, and one of the questions that I have and a lot of other people have is, tell us what the difference is between a refugee and an immigrant.
Absolutely. So this is a question that we get all the time, right? Our it's in our name, the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, right? There is a distinct difference between the two. We know at the end of the day that folks choose to move, right? People move, whether it's from neighborhood to neighborhood, from state to state, from country to country. People move, right? And they do so for countless of reasons, whether it's to flee a climate disaster, whether it's to pursue education or escape persecution or seek opportunities. To name just a few, people move for those reasons, right? And people come here with a lot of hope, with a lot of dreams for a better future. And that right there in that process is where the difference lies, right? Specifically, a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee their home country due to a well-founded fear or a persecution based on number of different reasons. For example, race, religion or nationality, or certain political opinions, right? And an immigrant is someone who chooses to move to another country for reasons that are more so along the lines of family, education, or generally who have the option to return to their home country, right? So to summarize, the difference is that a refugee is someone who's essentially fleeing danger. An immigrant is also someone who could be fleeing danger, but who is able to come and seek out a better life, and who, as I mentioned, generally do have the option to return back to their home country.
Okay. So when we talk about refugee status, how does a person obtain status as a refugee?
So this is actually something incredibly important that I'm glad that you bring up, is we have heard, time and time again, this anti-immigrant narrative that has been used as basically a way to draw a wedge between our communities, right? And what is the thing I'm talking about? It's our southern border, right? So
Yeah.
The southern border has just been used as the ultimate scapegoat for all issues that are affecting working families, all issues that are affecting Tennesseans and folks across the country. It's not immigrants who are causing us to stay in traffic for hours. It's not immigrants who are choosing to divert our public resources for private schools, right? And it's not at the southern border. And we keep seeing that time and time again. So the reason that I bring that up is because the southern border has been used as this sensationalized uh, tool to drive us further apart, right? When in reality, what we have seen is that, seeking asylum and seeking refugee status is a right. It is a right to pursue refugee status and asylum status. The difference between those two, between asylum and refugee, is um, in order to follow the lawful pathway that exists of becoming an asylum seeker, one must present themselves at the southern border, right? Like that is literally part of the process. It is the right of an individual to seek asylum. And by doing so, you have to, of course, meet very rigorous requirements, but it's essentially someone who, as I was mentioning, is someone who's fleeing danger in their home country, right? And the way that asylees and refugees differ is because an asylum seeker is one who flees danger in their home country and presents their case at the southern border. And that is different from a refugee. A refugee does that process in their home country and then is able to be given or granted refugee status to then come to the country as a refugee, right? So the way that those two are different is that one is at the southern border, one is in their home country.
So when we look at and thank you for that. So when we look at refugees, I know that Tennessee is the home to quite a few refugees, and we have a huge Kurdish population. And the way I look at it, so tell me if this is wrong. I mean, the way I understand it is in those cases, these are people that we are essentially inviting to come here. I mean, they have been declared refugees in their country that they're fleeing. And we have said, yes, we will take these 25 people, for example. And then we bring them to Tennessee. Is that basically how that works?
So the process when it comes to refugees is that, there is the refugee resettlement uh, system, right? Which is essentially something that um, talks to each other from the federal to the state level. We have an awesome organization here in Tennessee called NICE, right? And that organization has worked very closely with the federal refugee resettlement program to be able to welcome refugees, right? And help resettle those refugees in Tennessee, right? With their refugee status from another country. Um, of course, throughout history, there has been different there have been different amounts of how many refugees are allowed from what country into what state. And something that is really important to note about this is that with the new administration, what this did was that it put these refugee resettlement groups uh, in danger, right? A lot of them losing funding, a lot of them having to scramble to be able to provide such vital and critical services to these individuals who are refugees and are just coming here to be able to have an opportunity to, as was the beginning of our conversation, to be able to thrive, right? And with the new administration, we have seen a lot of folks, friends that I have who have been part of the refugee resettlement groups that are on the ground assisting these folks who have lost jobs, who are looking for other ways, outside of the federal funding that they can support these families, right? Because it's becoming very, very difficult to be able to do the work with the current administration, whether it be, capping the refugee resettlement countries, or capping them from what state they're able to go to, the regulations that are in place, the added increased regulations, or again, as I mentioned, the lack of funding. It's making it extremely difficult for us to be able to welcome these individuals. So yeah, and this is something that we have been seeing. It's not new, right? The issue of immigration goes back centuries, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But when it comes to the refugee resettlement process and system, I can even remember from state level work that we have been doing for in recent years, where there have been certain pieces of legislation that add more regulations to the existing federal level process for the refugee resettlement system at the state level, basically saying, hey, we need state entities to report XYZ around refugees from XYZ places. And it's like, hey, look, all this already exists. Like a lot of these groups who are doing the refugee resettlement already have to provide a lot of information and transparency and accountability to the federal government. So the reason I bring this up is that, this is a very clear pattern and theme that we are seeing even to this past legislative session, of this process of wasting Tennessee taxpayer dollars on processes that already exist at the federal level. As we know, immigration law is the jurisdiction of the federal government.
Right, right. Well, and I think, I know I can probably say some things about some politics that you can't say because of your position, but that's pretty performative, I think, at the state level. They're just doing that because they want to be seen as being tough on immigration. When we have refugees who have come to Tennessee, I think a little history is important. Our current governor, Bill Lee, in his first term as governor, he led sort of the march to say, hey, let's make Tennessee a place where we can welcome some refugees. And I don't know what the numbers are that he put on that, but it was a big push that he had. And his wife, Maria, our first lady, was, and I think probably still is, very active in the refugee community, working with the women, helping them resettle, doing all the things that need to be done to help them build their life in the United States. And Governor Lee was not only supportive in that, he was a bit of a catalyst for that. Some of the legislators, when he was elected and he brought this program forward, did not like it, but he explained to them that he just felt this was the right thing to do, that, too much is given, much is expected, and we could take some refugees here in Tennessee and help them build lives and raise their children here. But it seems to me that now we've kind of gotten in a situation where because of those programs, we have refugees who have who have legally come to Tennessee pretty much at our invite. And their resettlement program is supposed to last a certain amount of time, but without the funding for some of those programs, I think you guys are really scrambling to figure out a way to still have the funds and the manpower to help these families finish their resettlement process. Is that fair to say?
Well, we know that this anti-immigrant rhetoric that we see trickling down from the Oval Office, something we say all the time is that narrative shapes policy, right? And we feel the policy at the most everyday level, right? specifically when it comes to immigration law, right? Especially when it comes to keeping families together, being able to fully support an individual to have the opportunities, to have all the resources, services that they need to be able to thrive fully in their community. And what this has created with the new administration is, immediately when taking office, the refugee resettlement program was halted, just flat out halted, right? And what this did was that it left so many families um, in jeopardy, right? I remember reading and talking to some of our partner organizations who do a lot of this work here in Tennessee, stories of hundreds of refugees who were in line ready to come to the United States and having their entire lives be put on pause because of this administration change. And I mean, these are very real life scenarios that we see
And the
that
scary
happen.
thing about the most frightening thing about that for me is that I envision these families, and they've made the decision to ask for refugee status, and let's say they're on the border of their country or they're in some sort of settlement. it's I think it's very dangerous for them just to all of a sudden say, okay, well, we can't do that. We'll just go back to where we were, because I'm assuming now that many of them, have perhaps political reasons for needing to get out of the country that they're in, religious reasons, etc. And I worry for them. I mean, they're sort of stuck in limbo there. That's tragic.
Yeah, and you know, something that we talk about a lot is uh, the way that we are pivoting away from talking about legality, right? It's something that is used in the conversation of, the common, oh well, as long as they do it the right way, they have nothing to worry about. As long as they do it as long as they wait in line, like the classic saying when it comes to immigration. Um, the reality, first and foremost, is that there is no line, right? But two, say someone has the opportunity to get in this hypothetical, almost impossible line, they're now being stripped of that opportunity now. And we
Right.
saw that very clearly. We're seeing this very clearly in front of our eyes. These heartbreaking situations of people now with the refugee resettlement program being one of the many different ways um, that people are now having to be to go back into completely perilous situations that they have fled from, right? I mean, that's not an easy task, right? To leave everything you know and love behind in a place to come to a new place, right? I mean, and that is not an easy task. It takes courage, it takes resilience, and especially when it comes to um, refugees who are literally refugees because of uh, the fact that they're fleeing persecution, right? And now they're doing it, quote unquote, the right way, as we hear all the time. Do it the right way, and but it's telling them, hey, look, actually, no, that right way does not work for us, right? And we are seeing this time and time again of how the new administration is um, at a snap of a finger is converting entire groups to not have status at all, right? For example, there are other type of immigration benefits or other type of like a refugee, but other type of programs that exist, and a lot of them have been terminated as well, right? Processes that have been created to give folks a lawful pathway to be in the United States, that now the Trump administration has rescinded, to where um, it is basically creating new groups of undocumented people, right? And
Right.
uh,
Right. And I think about the family who, you know, this is just, you know, make believe, but I believe this real situation exists from talking to people who do some of the work that you're doing, is that we have some families. I mean, when a family has gained refugee status and they come to the United States, no matter where they go, I mean, there's a process that has to be gone through. You know, you're talking about language lessons. You're talking about teaching someone how to use public transportation, helping them find a job and get some of those skills going. A place to live, furniture, getting the kids in school, keeping their medical exams. I mean, there's so many things that refugees need when they arrive in a place that actually they've been promised when they were given refugee status. I don't think anybody in their right mind would say, yes, I want to be a refugee and I don't care where you drop me and I don't need any support when I land in this new country and don't speak the language and I've got these kids with me. Don't worry about that. No, they expect a softer landing and they've been told they'll be sort of segued into life in the United States. And I think we have people who are in the middle of that process, or even in some cases the beginning of that process, and now the administration is pulling that funding back. So it's almost like, what are these people going to do? They can't return where they came from. They'll be beheaded, you know, and I mean, literally beheaded. And yet we have them here. Are we just going to turn them out on the streets and say, sorry, we don't have the money to support you anymore. Figure it out on your own?
Right. And, you know, something that I really want to highlight is the fact that refugee resettlement policy has existed in the United States for decades, right? This isn't just something new here.
Right.
This is not normal, right? The fact that this entire program has been halted. I mean, it is truly a crisis, right? Like, and we know some of our partner organizations that we work closely with, you know, are saying the same thing, that this is creating a crisis situation, right? Like, we are seeing a lot of unprecedented measures taking place, this being one of them, right? And you're 100% right. These individuals are exercising their legal right to seek refugee status. They're, you know, being granted refugee status. As I mentioned earlier, there was a group of individuals, I think it was hundreds of refugees from a certain country that were awaiting their flight to the United States. And then they were told, sorry, can't do it.
I read about that. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are truly, and something that we've been talking about a lot is the way that a lot of the conversations we have and a lot of the messaging, it can sound very hyperbolic, right? Of like, you know, we have to, this is the fight of our lives, or like, we're living in unprecedented times. Like, this is a never before seen matter. Like, it sounds hyperbolic until you get into the conversation and it's like, oh my gosh, like, this is really, really happening in broad daylight, many of which is unconstitutional, and that is and should be of concern to so many Tennesseans and to the folks who are listening, who are watching. And I know, I'm sure we'll get into it, but you know, now is the time to channel that anger, frustration, confusion into action, right? And getting plugged in, taking action, and making sure that we maintain as an educated front and an organized front against a lot of these attacks that we're seeing.
I agree. And just so that the listeners can kind of hear maybe an example of some of the folks we're talking about. I know I did read a story about our governor's wife, the first lady. She has spent some time working with Kurdish refugees, women, and some of those women are refugees and they're in Tennessee because their husbands were killed when it was discovered they were working as translators for U.S. Armed Forces. And so that left a wife and a mom with children who, you know, thank goodness we were able to offer them refugee status. So, you know, these are the kind of people that apparently the administration is fine just leaving high and dry. And I don't think many good people anywhere agree with some of these cuts. So when we talk about the state legislation that you mentioned early on, I mean, are we saying in Tennessee that we will just not accept any more refugees? Is that the point that we're at now?
Well, the way that this is coming from the federal government, right? Like this is coming from the federal government, from the Trump administration, that has essentially, for all intended purposes, stopped the refugee resettlement program, right? Making it very, very, very difficult for organizations that are on the ground to be able to carry out their mission in supporting services, resources, support of any kind to refugees across the country. And we have already seen how this is coupled with the actions of our state legislature, as the legislation that I was just mentioning before. I mean, we've seen several different attempts to cut the Tennessee Office of Refugees, right? We also have that office here at the state level that basically works directly with the federal government to liaise that process of welcoming refugees. So yeah, it is becoming very, very, very hard to do that. We know that there's also a cap that exists. We know that when the Biden administration was in office, they raised that cap that existed. And it has been from the immigrant rights movement and an opportunity for to put pressure on elected officials of saying, hey, look, let's raise this cap, right? Let's welcome more refugees at the federal level and welcome more refugees at the state level as well. But yeah, so from the federal government's guidance coupled with the climate and rhetoric that comes from the state legislature, it is becoming incredibly hard to be able to provide resources and services to refugee communities here in the state of Tennessee.
Well, and I want to ask you some things about your own personal situation, but I also want to say this. I think I look at some of these refugee situations, and when you look at them from a geopolitical standpoint, there are times when I believe that our government has done things in other countries to have actually created a refugee situation. I mean, we have literally put our nose in other countries' business and caused certain groups of people to need to flee to save their lives. And so in some cases, we have created a situation that we're now turning our back on. And I don't see how that can sit well with anybody. So you actually lived for a while as an undocumented immigrant. Tell me about your path from Guadalajara to Nashville, Tennessee.
Absolutely, I'd love to. And just to kind of highlight for the listeners and viewers, the conversation that we had is regarding refugees, right? Individuals who have gone through the process of seeking out their right to this lawful pathway, right? We haven't necessarily touched that much on undocumented immigrants, right? Who are individuals who, based on where they come from, The federal government has not been able to give them a status, a lawful status in the United States, right? Um, Something that I want to highlight that a lot of people, a common misconception that folks have is, you know, folks are saying a lot of times like, well, just apply for citizenship, like just apply for citizenship. Like it's a few $100s, but just do it, right? Like why aren't you doing it? Well, the thing that a lot of folks don't really understand is that you have to have had a an opportunity to adjust your status, right? To then one day become a US citizen, right? Many different folks, it can look many different ways. As I mentioned at the beginning, right? People move for several different reasons. Um, for me personally, it was my mom and I, we came to Knoxville, Tennessee from Guadalajara, Mexico, under a tourist visa, right? And I mentioned that with a lot of privilege, right? Like that already in and of itself is a lot of privilege that I was able to come here with a tourist visa. Um, it can be very costly, um, but for us, ours was valid for a certain amount of years, right? Um, so we came here with the tourist visa. We landed in Knoxville, Tennessee. My uncle, my mom's oldest brother, had moved here before us to start a restaurant. So we came here, followed in his footsteps. He moved to Atlanta, so our only family here is my mom and I and my brother and sister, and then my uncle's family. Um, and yeah, grew up here in Knoxville, Tennessee. Well, over there in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it wasn't until I was 15 years old when all of my friends in high school were getting their learner's permit. When I came out to my mom and I said, "Hey, I want to be able to drive to school. I want to get my learner's permit." And at this point, a lot of the kids in my grade, they were doing a class called driver's ed,
Right.
right? Which was I'll never forget this. It was a process of it was basically like a class where you're able to just go and like mess around and maybe drive one or two times a week, but all
Usually
the other
taught
days.
by the football coach, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I was like, wait, I want to do this. I want to go with my friends and do this. And that's when I realized that I was undocumented.
Mm.
I went up to my mom and I said, I want to take this really cool, fun class. I want to go drive. And she said, well, we can't. You don't have a social security number. Um, and this is the first time that I recognized the very different and real reality that I had to live with for, at this point, an unknown amount of years, right? The rest of the foreseeable future as an undocumented person. Um, it hit me again, of course, when it came to getting a driver's license. I wasn't able to get my driver's license. Um, at this point, I was getting a little bit older. I couldn't get a bank account. Um, but it really hit me whenever I graduated high school, which, one of the main things that was always instilled in me by my family was an education, right? Education is the one thing that can never be taken away from you, right? Is what I was always told. And so I worked very, very hard in school. Um, I was able to get into the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, which was, if for any of the East Tennessee folks who listen, I mean, that is like everyone's entire life if you live in Knoxville. So
Yeah.
for me, like my whole life that I know, right, since I was 5 when I moved here until I was 18 was like go Vols was
Right.
everything, right? So for me, getting into UT Knoxville was a dream come true for a kid from Guadalajara, Mexico, who um, didn't even have a learner's permit driver's license. So it was a really, really big deal. And um, I was a senior and I had 3 meetings, right? They were like, okay, you go to these 3 meetings, you automatically qualify for 2 years of free community college. So I was like, this obviously sounds like a very smart idea. Go get 2 free years and just transfer over to UT. This sounds great. And so I went to these meetings. I was at my third and final meeting when I walked in, and they said, "You actually are not on the list.
Mm.
You don't qualify for the FAFSA." And I was like, what is a FAFSA? Like what does this mean? What do I have to do? Who do I need to talk to? Can I fill this out right now? And something that we say a lot in the work that we do is that we have to grow up very quickly, right? We have to, for many of us, our first job is at 8, 9, 10 years old, being our family's interpreter, of
Right,
legal
right.
documents. And so this was nothing new, right? It was something I reveled in. I was like, okay, yeah, sign me up for whatever the FAFSA is. I will fill this out. Tell me what it is. But unfortunately, no one was able to help me because of my immigration status. Um, this I was hit with this reality that because of our state laws here in Tennessee, those who are not citizens or on a pathway to citizenship are not eligible for state in-state tuition or federal financial aid. So what this
Mm.
meant was that I would have to pay out of pocket at the out of state rate to be able to go to college. And uh, I mean, I didn't have $30,000-$40,000 a year to in my bank account to be able to do this. So I joined a community call the week later that I was told about by one of the admissions people at the community college. And I went to the meeting. I heard somebody sharing their story, and it was the exact same story
Mm.
I went through. And I made it my goal to come up to this person and say, "Hey, you have changed my life." Right? Like I have never felt this sense of community, this sense of belonging before in my life. Um, and I said, I want to do exactly what you do. Um, and that was his name is Cesar. He's now my coworker. It was the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. And I've been part of the movement ever since and fighting for, those who come after us, right? We know that this work has to be sustainable. And our job as leaders is to create more leaders, right? And
So after you met with them, then did you say, okay, I need to get on the path to citizenship, and how do I do that?
yeah, so the way that it worked out for me was whenever we had first moved here, we had started my immigration process. So in 2000, we had started my immigration process um, through the business, which now is almost an impossible way to get lawful status going the business route. It still can be done, but very, very hard. Um, so yeah, back in 2000, when we first arrived, was when we had started the process. In 2017 was when I received a call from my immigration attorney. And they said, "Hey, the process that you started 17 years ago has finally been approved." So what that meant for me was that I had to go through a process called consular process, right? Which basically means where I have to return to my home country and re-enter the United States as a green card holder, right?
Mm.
So that's what I did in
That
2017.
had to be very scary, though. Were you afraid that you wouldn't get the green card and you might not get to come back?
Yeah, so I'm actually so glad you mentioned this. Um, my mom, I owe everything to my mom, right? Anybody who knows me knows that I always go on tangents talking about my mom, which I will not. I'll do for a minute, but basically, um, she never told me that it would be an option or for them to deny the my readmission into the United States,
Mm.
right? She's like, look, you're gonna go down there. It's gonna be great. You're gonna go back for the first time in 17 years. I mean, it was truly like a dream come true, that something that had seemed that a dream, right? Only. So I went back to Mexico. I went to Ciudad Juarez. I had never been in my entire life, but that's where the consulate was. So I had to go there. Luckily, I was able to have my uncle go with me and be there in that process. Again, as I share when I talk about my story, the privilege that I had to be able to have him there. Um, so we went back, and that's when it hit me, right? Where that, oh wow, like I this moment right now could either keep me here and separated from my mom, my little brother, my little sister, my friends, everything that I know in Knoxville, Tennessee, or I get to go back. And this was all decided by a random person who had never met me, uh, who was basically the person in charge of my future, in
Hmm.
charge of everything that would come after. And um, you're at the interview process, and you have to go through biometrics. You have to have a vaccines, criminal check, everything, medical exam, all the things, and you finally get the very last one is your interview. And what's interesting is that there's a corridor where there's one corridor whether you were accepted or denied. So you either see people who are having the best day of their life or having the worst day of their life,
Oh,
watching them as you go in like a cohort of group a group of like 20 people. You kind of just move throughout the day. We got there at like 6 in the morning, there probably to like 4 or 5 p.m., just going from group to group with this corridor right in the middle of you the entire day. And luckily I got to my interview, and the person just asked me one question. He said, "You graduated from high school in the United States?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay, well, your English is pretty good." I was like, "Thanks." He was like, "Okay, good to go." He gave me my stuff back,
oh,
and he was like,
wow.
"Get your visa in the mail." And
But
um,
but the reality, I think, right now, Luis, is that all of that has been stopped, and so we have. I guess these are what we call dreamers. We have people here who were brought as young children, and we're giving them zero path now to get citizenship. Is that right?
that's exactly right. And you know, that process that I just described was part one in becoming a citizen, right? You have to wait then after that 5 years or three, depending on your case, to become a U.S. citizen,
Mm.
right? So then I wait 5 more years before I could even apply to become a U.S. citizen. Um, and this is my story as someone who did have that opportunity to seek out an immigration benefit. For so many people, really good friends of, I mean, my best friends, a lot of people that I know, my family, right? They don't have that opportunity,
Mm.
right? Uh, to change their status or to become a lawful individual. It's not that they don't want to, right?
Right.
It's that they can't. There is no lawful pathway for so many people. Why? Because it has been 30, 40 years since our immigration laws have been updated. They're so outdated that people, even if they want to find a lawful pathway and be here and become citizens, they can't. They simply can't. Even if they're people who pay taxes, who um, whatever it may be, right? And they can't, because they do not have this lawful pathway to be able to become citizens because of our outdated immigration laws. And now, in addition to our immigration laws being outdated, the attacks and the scapegoating of immigrant community members has increased tremendously, creating this division and fear amongst our communities, and using people like me, our immigrant community, our refugee community members, as the scapegoat.
Right, right. And that's definitely a crying shame. If someone wanted to learn more about the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, what is the website for that, Luis?
Yeah, our website is tnimmigrant.org. We have spent more than 20 years on the ground fighting for a Tennessee where all of us can belong and thrive. We do this through um, our organizing team, legal team, advocacy, services, uh, essentially doing everything that we can to organize our community, amplify immigrant voices, and continue the fight towards a Tennessee where we can all thrive.
Are there
And
volunteer opportunities at TIRCC? TIRRC?
yes, absolutely. We have volunteer opportunities, internship opportunities, fellowship opportunities. There's a lot of times that we are hiring folks can join the movement. There's a lot of community calls, almost weekly, bi-weekly, uh, and just making sure that folks have an entry point and have an opportunity to join us in this work. So yeah, we also have our social media, also at TN Immigrant, where we are constantly posting about legislative updates, where we're talking about our legal services that we provide, our resources that we have, especially right now in this moment. We are making sure that all of our communities have the resources, the knowledge, and are now organized to make sure that we are protecting ourselves and our communities.
And I'm assuming there's also a donate now button because this is is it a 501c3?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we have the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, which is the 501c3, and we also have TIRRC Votes, which is our political arm, which was created in 2018 to fight for and champion candidates who are aligned with our values. And yeah, so we have both of those, and yeah, we are making sure that we are sending that message loud and clear, right? That the power of the people is greater than the people in power, right? And
Well, and we have a really recent example of that here in Tennessee, and I know that your work was very important in that, for folks outside of Tennessee or for folks who just don't follow all of this stuff. The legislature considered a bill that would say that school systems would have the choice to not educate undocumented children or either charge them for their education. And that bill has been tabled. We don't know that it's gone forever. I suspect it may rear its ugly head when the session comes back in January. But for right now, Luis and his group and all of the people who took the time to call and write their legislators caused that bill to get on the back burner and not get passed for now. So we have to keep that pressure up, correct?
you said it perfectly. We send kids to school knowing that their right to an education is protected and secured based on longstanding Supreme Court precedent that ensures that all of us, regardless of status, are able to get a free education. We know that education is a right and not a privilege, but what we saw this legislative session is the attempt to strip children of their freedom to learn. And luckily, thanks to hours, so many thousands of emails, thousands of phone calls, um, hundreds of legislative meetings from directly impacted students, parents, faith leaders, business owners who came together with our shared vision that education is for all of us. We were able to ensure that that piece of legislation did not move forward this year. As we know, the legislative session in Tennessee operates in two parts. So we just got done with part one. So the 114th General Assembly continues with its part two in 2026. So we know that this legislation is more than likely will be brought back up again next year. We have heard already that one of the sponsors of the bill, has, quote, absolutely planned to bring this legislation back. So now more than ever, it's so important for us to continue to organize at the local level, your friends, your families, your teachers, principals. Something that I do want to highlight is that, we are living in a supermajority here in Tennessee. And with the power of the people, we were able to stop this supermajority's leader from passing this piece of legislation. And that is all thanks to the work that everyday Tennesseans are doing, coming together year after year, day after day, to make sure that we continue to send that message loud and clear that education is for all of us, that we all belong, that we all deserve to thrive in our communities. So I encourage everybody to join us and be a part of this work.
Well, thank you so much for all of the work that you did in that, Luis. You are the best of us, and I love your story and the fact that you don't leave anybody behind. You didn't close the door behind yourself. You're still working so that others can have a shot at a great life here in the United States. I appreciate you spending time with us today. And we're going to put in the show notes all of the links to the various things that Luis and I have discussed so that folks can do that. And if you've got some extra funds and you've been fortunate in that way, hit that donate button, and help in this effort so that we can be the kind of people that I think we've been called to be, that I know we've been called to be, to help people belong and thrive and live good and prosperous lives. So thank you so much for joining us, Luis. It was a pleasure to have you on Blue Lift. And I hope the listeners will let us know what you think of this episode, good or bad. Send us an email. All of that, all those opportunities are in the show notes. And so have a great day, Luis, and we'll probably be seeing you around January at the Capitol.
Yes, ma'am. The pleasure was mine.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.